Hello, everybody. We're going to delve further with none other than former NRG observer, coach, potentially Korean speaking enthusiast.
We're a little ahead of ourselves, but yes.
Seamoose, how you doing? Hopefully.
Good, man. Like I told you, I just got done playing some competitive Overwatch. My PC crashed, so I lost some 50 SR. So I'm great. It's been a good day.
Good, good, good. I'm glad to hear it because, the scene's been kind of going through some strange times.
Hmm.
And you've been kind of with it nearly from the beginning, I would say. Like, if not day one, week one for sure.
Hmm.
You've been a man of many hats,
Yes.
and you have quite a history with Overwatch. But I want to start kind of near the beginning. If this is the beginning, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong. Now, doing the research, I found you tied to MLG Vegas and Observer, and you actually corrected me and said that you also did World Cup. We'll get into some of the more topical things with observing and kind of leading that. But, kind of talk to me about, MLG and World Cup and what were your experiences and, what maybe you might like to see observing look like in the future.
Okay. Yeah, so I mean to touch on like the day one, sort of week one,
Sure.
I was pretty involved in the League of Legends scene
Hmm.
for Overwatch. As soon as the video came out, I think it was like BlizzCon 2014 for
Mm-hmm.
like the Overwatch premiere, with like the Punch Kid and the
Yeah.
Doomfist Gauntlet and everything. That was like instantly day one. I subscribed to r/Overwatch, like, and I was coming off of League of Legends. I really liked that game, but I was sort of hoping like maybe Overwatch like a little bit more fertile ground because I sort of was climbing up caster ranks and I was really interested in caster, but
Mm.
there's a lot more saturation, competition, and it was anyway. So I started. I did some work through TESPA, which is the Collegiate Blizzard branch, essentially.
Right.
And while I was playing in the closed beta, which I got into through a TESPA contact, thanks, Logan. And I organized like a little collegiate tournament, which eventually became like a little produced tournament that we like hosted. Something at DreamHack. It was like an online thing, so it was really small. But that got me in touch with Trevor from the Blizzard team, Rachel Seltzer Kirko,
Oh,
who's
okay.
yeah, she's obviously been like on the World Cup
Yeah.
stage. Um, and that got me in the conversation as someone who knows about the game because I was like playing on really crappy teams or like sort of part-time analyzing for a team too.
Mm.
And eventually, I don't even remember how it happened, but was hired as the lead observer through Yellow Light, which is one of the companies that Blizzard was working with, and worked at the Overwatch World Cup 2016, and then was hired for MLG Vegas as well, which is where I met Chris Bucket and a bunch of other cool people. So observing at that time, like we had way less tools. I mean, I can't even imagine what the tools are now, but observing at that time was like super, super rough because remember, you didn't even have the free cam HP bars.
Sure.
The game itself was much less defined.
Mm.
So especially before the Overwatch League days in a tournament like MLG Vegas, like teams were at totally different levels. Like you had Rise Nation, like all the way up to freaking like the FaZe versus NV finals, and
Sure.
because the team difference and skill and the meta, like it was a really sort of Wild West period for observing, which was pretty fun too because we can I swear on this? Like, do you
Yeah,
care?
yeah, no, okay.
We got to do a lot of cool shit and like just experiment with stuff, and like there was a lot of feedback being pinged back and forth between the observers. Some healthy shouting sessions, like asking Blizzard, like as the client, like what do they want?
Mm.
How do we want the game to grow, so to speak? Um, so yeah, that was really fun, although it was really tough, obviously, because at MLG Vegas, for example, our venue was shared with Call of Duty, so it was super, super loud.
Mm.
It was freezing, but every venue is freezing, so
Yeah.
that's not a huge deal. In the Overwatch World Cup, we had 6 observers and we had 18 machines total. So we had 12 bot cameras for the first person's perspective for everyone. And like MLG Vegas, it was like 4-man team, one of whom never did Overwatch before and
Mm.
none of us knew. Everyone else had worked on the Overwatch World Cup previously.
Right.
It was pretty crazy, and I mean, I met Imagine and Dashner working at the Overwatch World Cup. Sort of around the same time, I was also working parallel as a coach, and that's when I met Alchemister Jason at E-League. So pretty early on, as far as like the production side of Overwatch is concerned, I met a lot of those guys who are still my friends and still like contacts, and still most of them no longer involved in Overwatch, but still sort of in the public eye, if that makes sense.
Right. Now, you like you said, you've worked those events, and it was, you know, kind of crazy, and it felt like World Cup was, you know, the first big push forward in terms of really trying to figure out the game. Like you mentioned, there was, you know, numerous machines, tons of observers. Kind of, and this is a big question, so, you know, take from this or do what with this what you can. But coming from World Cup, and now, you know, we're in 2018, we're looking at season 2 of Overwatch League in a few months, hopefully. You know, what are some things that you still kind of want to see done with observing? Is there fixed camera positions that you really want to see? Is there, you know, something that you just kind of irks you? Like, as someone who has experience with this, what would you do to add to this?
So personally, I've got dream goals, which either due to me talking to someone or just seeing the writing on the wall, I don't expect to happen. Sure. And I also have like reasonable expectations for like some things that might happen. Dream goal of mine, for example, and I have from day one said this, it's very, very likely never gonna happen, is having an asymmetrical UI where the HP bars of the teams are both on the left, center, or the right side of the screen. So it's much easier to compare, and you do it by role too. So like, you have both Reinhardts like right on top of each other. It's so much easier to see the HP bars and like to understand what's going on in the game. This was like also asked before free cam HP bars, so it's not as important now. And the reason why it essentially is not going to happen is because, at least from my understanding, was that Blizzard wants the 12 players in their seats to be lined up symmetrically, right? Because they're on the opposite sides of the stage.
Right.
But I actually think it's really important. I think if you look at sports like soccer, for example, will have the scores in the top left. You can put like the payload progress and like the objectives on the right side, and then you can have like in the middle, you can have the time and the general objectives that are still there. And just in general, like UI tweaks that are customizable is something that I'm really not sure if Blizzard is ever going to implement besides just in-house work, but I think it could be really helpful. Like take the HP bars from the bottom left, stick it next to the ult charge, you know, don't have it in 3 separate ways and all. Condensing that information would be much, much simpler to understand. However, it's also a matter of that's very different from how the game is actually presented when you're playing.
Sure.
Which is why I can understand that's why Blizzard said that they weren't or aren't particularly interested from what that seems. However, like things that seem reasonable, map callouts. So pro players will oftentimes use, like, there's a couple of callouts. It's like left, right, and then like main. It'd be nice. And if you notice, actually, Blizzard, it was actually pretty cool talking to Jeff Kaplan about this. They intentionally had a lot of things named. For example, hotel in Kings Row is like Aldersworth Hotel or something. And he was talking to me. He said that it was like almost old WoW process where everything that was like a building itself had like a different name, and so they didn't actually make specific callouts like a game like Counter-Strike has.
Sure.
But they plan to have those callouts, or at least they wanted like the competitive scene to like have a small idea. But because there was no ever like very official, standard, homogenized, published list, that's something that I think could easily be remedied, or the community itself. And I remember like way back in the day, Captain Planet tried to sort of come up and like SPO, if you know who that is, like try to come up with these callouts. It's not as important as it is in Counter-Strike, but it's still like much simpler to understand. If you know like this back corner of the first point in Dorado, like just call it some random mega
closet
or
something.
or have like a real thing, like set up a camera on closet because, you know, the Tracer's going for a really cool flank. I think that's not an unreasonable thing that would probably help observing a lot. Colors was a phenomenal thing to implement. I'm glad they finally did. Yeah, I think the UI itself is like, so the implementation of replays and the way the replay system works, which is also obviously needs some tweaking, and I haven't been working with Blizzard on observing in over a year, so I don't know where it is, but like those are all really good changes. And for me personally, like I would like to see like a little bit more liberal experimenting with the UI. That's like those are the two things I would say is like UI and callouts probably to
one of their other games that kind of has a UI that I think would work well in Overwatch is kind of the competitive WoW scene, where they take very important cooldowns and they show them to the audience and say, okay, this is either on cooldown or it's not, and it's you could use it, or you know, it at least gives that message to the viewer and says, you know, these are the tools that the players have and these are the tools they don't have.
That's a really good point. I think the standard observing, the layout of the standard, the way that the game is observed is pretty good. Yeah. But I think like there's no reason not to like try doing new things. You'll like the having cooldowns highlighted, having like hero swaps like kind of flash out. I think it was MLG Vegas which did something really, really cool. Although it didn't show up on stream live, you saw the hero portraits behind it. It's probably like this in the Overwatch League studio now I think about this too. You see like the Overwatch, like the character will change when they swap. Right, exactly. So it's like duh. But that's still harder to see on stream, and obviously there's hundreds of thousands, millions of people watching on stream, so that could be something they could work on. And just like iterate, like something I will personally refer to a lot, because it's the game, the esport that I started with was League of Legends, is that it's been 8 years into League of Legends and they're still iterating, like showing like timers for inhibitors, like timers for big ultimates. The statistics could be worked on as well, like be more interesting, like ultimate pacing, for example. Like there's a really, really cool economical game that exists in Overwatch that is very hard to see. That's less observing though, and more like presentation of game mechanic. Right. Yeah, it's. I
mean, we can talk about that though.
Yeah, we can. I mean, one of the nice things about a young game is that there's like, it's like a creative process of like what's more important, you know. Like heat maps of locations that teams will take on their routes. That is something that oh my goodness, that would be so cool to see, because like not only would that be cool to see, but it's also really important for analytical assessment actually. Because if you notice that the London Spitfire have won King's Row 9 out of 10 times in the past season, but 7 out of 10 times they take not the same fight, like not the same opening strat, but like the same initial route, or their pathing is similar, you can start to recognize patterns, which and just like the more patterns exist, and patterns exist, but the more patterns are recognizable, the more understanding we have of the game, the higher the gameplay is, the higher the enjoyment as well. Yeah, like the better the sport as a competition, the more enjoyable it is to watch from top to bottom. Although one of the focuses right now, because there's still so much to figure out on what they want Overwatch to be, is still like, how do we present it as, I don't want to use the word casual, but like for a new viewer, how do we present it as simply as possible? And definitely the game has a lot of challenges in that it has multiple different levels. It has multiple different types of, you know, heroes. It's not as simple as watching a game like Counter-Strike or watching a game like League of Legends, or probably literally any esport in the game, like in the world, in terms of how many different, not like how different the game is, because if you watch StarCraft for the first time, you have no idea what's going on, of course, other than armor. But like how many challenges specifically, and how the map layout and the game is played, make it very difficult to observe. And it's probably likely too that people don't really give observers, here's like, I'm patting myself on the back retroactively, like, but that's probably something that people don't give observers enough credit for. Not at all. Is how nutty it is to actually observe this game.
That's one thing that I do have to kind of give all the observers out there, whether you're amateur, whether you're, you know, the toppest tier professional. And maybe you'll disagree with me here, but I think this is probably one of the hardest games to observe, and you're going to miss things sometimes. You know, I think with a game this fast paced with abilities that are so impactful, it's like, okay, well, what do we watch? Do we watch an Earthshatter or do we watch an Ononade? Well, both of them could win a fight.
Dude, that's the thing that like, and this is a big thing. You see this in other games as well. A lot of my references are just gonna be other games because
that's perfectly fine.
Those models exist. Like, why not learn from them?
Of course.
Who was it? It was Steel, right? Steel. There's I don't know if you follow Counter-Strike, but there's a thread on r/global offensive. Steel, a former player who was banned for the whole skin fiasco. He was undoubtedly the best observer across multiple productions that the game had seen. It was evidenced by the fact that he saw more frags before they happened, and then they caught them in first-person camera. Sleggy, who's actually someone who worked on the Overwatch World Cup 2016, 2017, he is a former Counter-Strike professional and is now one of the major observers, and he is well regarded as a person with such high game sense. The game sense lets you predict things before they happen, and that makes those 50-50s, like you were saying, like the Reinhardt Shatter versus like the Annonade, easier to guess. You're still gonna miss. It is absolutely a creative art and not a perfect science. And I kind of agree with the idea that like you don't want to see 100% of the kills.
Right.
You can physically. And so the whole thing that became a meme with Alchemist, or like the narrative, the narrative is actually really important. You may disagree that the implementation of his vision of the narrative was wrong, and I would actually agree with that too, especially earlier when it was sort of attack focused only.
Sure.
But the idea that the narrative is more important than catching every single kill, or even the highest amount of kills, the highest volume of kills, is super, super important. And that's why players with higher game sense, who obviously know all the ropes of observing, will be more successful. But it's kind of like the movie Armageddon, where they have, this is going to sound off the rails, but bear with me. In the movie Armageddon, they have Bruce Willis and his co. is like a group of like miners, right? And they train them to be astronauts. Why not train fucking astronauts to be miners? That seems like much simpler. This observing actually has the exact same problem, because for the same reason why a professional player doesn't always make a good caster, a professional player or a really high level player won't always make a good observer or like production person, because they have no idea how it works.
Sure.
Because when I first started it, with the only thing I'd done before working with the pretty freaking huge productions was like small, you know, in a basement individual OBS streams, or like with 3 or 4 other people with a TD that was much more experienced than I am. And like I read like books on like, you know, the finding out the what's the word, like the in film you're supposed to keep it on one like horizontal line. You want to keep it, you don't want to be flipping back and forth. And we implemented like, what if we had like leapfrog cameras? What if we had like, we had a whole week before Overwatch World Cup 2016 where it was like a week and almost half. It was a long time with the huge group and a couple of Blizzard folk, and we just talked about like how exactly we want to do this. And like some people who are really, really high in terms of game sense might just not have the team skills, because the communication was super fucking important, or the production know-how, and just not really learn it. But I do think it is an important thing to have observers with high game sense, because they can make those 50-50 calls. They'll have a better understanding of it.
So the way that you kind of approach that would be kind of like in poker, where you're looking for the, you know, what's going to be the highest like effective value camera angle. Okay, that's interesting.
I mean, I'm going to reserve myself in terms of, I'm not going to intentionally try to make anyone feel bad in this when we talk. I will say that one thing Jason could have had better is Overwatch game knowledge. He is undoubtedly 100,000,000%, when he was hired and even now, the most experienced producer across a combination of titles, and especially in this kind of game. There was literally no person remotely close. Arguably the Apex guys, but like that would have not worked for other logistical. But Jason, in comparison to other observers, probably could have afforded to learn a little bit more about the game. But again, that's like under the amount of stress and workload you have anyway. That's sort of like a cherry on top that you need to really have a balance. It's like balancing an actual team of players. Some players can have specialized skill in this, and some players should have specialized skill in that, and you can't actually rely on one person, but like the whole team. And Overwatch is absolutely a team sport to observe, because observing with one person is actually easier than observing with 2 or 3. But if you have a team of 4 plus with a lead observer who's not actually observing anything but calling out things,
Sure.
it's much better. But if you don't have synergy, then it's just going to look awful. Yeah, observing this game, man, it's been in like an actual while since I've really like thought about it, but it is quite a wild ride.
I can't imagine, you know, some of the amateur kind of broadcast GG people out there.
Yeah, they are nuts. Like,
I got to give hats off to them, because it makes that game watchable, and it's a one-man crew most of the time. And
yeah,
you know,
and
God bless them.
They hit really cool things that, like, back in the day, like we thought about, like the nano transition to Genji Blade.
Sure.
Like, that looks cool as shit. But that's actually, I don't want to take away from them, because the amount of work they're putting in. That's actually easier to do with one person. Mm-hmm. Because before we thought about what if we cut it to 2 people, that was awful. And the system we had in place for 2016 and basically throughout all of 2016 was we had 2 first-person cameras, 2 free cams, and they always did on the red or blue side. And between that, like, they basically have sort of free reign, which makes things a lot more simple. But there's also a higher chance of missing things.
Sure.
But yeah, broadcast GG, I mean, we'll probably talk about them a couple of times throughout this interview, I think, because they're fucking phenomenal, and you know, I'll keep on doing. Yeah, that's amazing.
They're doing a great job. But I you touched on a really important point there. Kind of explaining this game to the general audience is something that I think we as a community have struggled doing. Whether it's definition of composition, like names themselves, whether it's call outs, whether it's just, you know, what is this team trying to do? What are they actually doing? And what is the enemy team doing to counter it? When it comes to the broadcast, obviously there needs to be entertainment, but would you looking into the future for Overwatch, so big picture, would you want the desk to be more analysis focused, to be able to better explain? Is there shoulder content that needs to be made to better explain to, you know, fans and viewers what's really happening, so either they can appreciate it better or at least they can understand what's going on? Is that something that needs to happen, do you think?
No, with a caveat.
Okay, sure.
The caveat is that the general audience, who are less, either because they're inexperienced in the game or they're just not particularly good, the general audience is going to outnumber the more focused competitive audience. That is always going to be the case. That's the case in every sport. It's just how these things work out.
Right, exactly. Sure.
The competitive audience is more obviously passionate and tend to be very vocal as well. And for that reason, there should be shoulder content. However, it should not be the main show. Okay. And what I mean is shoulder content in terms of, like, let's say you have the Dota system where players can go in and watch from any perspective. That I guess it's not an observing thing. I don't know why I didn't bring it up, though. That's like 100%. Like, why not just implement that?
Sure.
Like, that placates not everything, but that placates a huge amount of analytical interest and information. Or having multiple streams. This is something that Riot Games do with League of Legends. You don't have to do it all the time, but, like, you know, what if you had pro players casting on a secondary stream, which is designed to be completely, like, imagine if, like, Jake and ZP or like Jake and, you know, like Jake, ZP, and who's a Super. We'll just
Super.
Like, two vocal guys, 2 smart guys,
sure,
2 guys who present themselves well, with a caster to lead to be the host, and, like, they're watching the game while a group of other casters are doing the primary broadcast, casting over that. But, like, Super and Co are the main focus for people who want to, you know, see that extra content. Or, like, you could even have, like, a PC for them to just, if they wanted to take over the observing and just highlight a certain thing, like, go for it. That kind of shoulder content absolutely should exist, but it shouldn't come like maybe I didn't understand your question correctly, but like it
Sure.
shouldn't come at the cost of the more general content.
Okay.
You can balance it, and balancing it is really important. And I will absolutely agree that competitive right now is being less focused on because there's less of us.
Right. Sure.
But the game kind of just goes back to what I was saying before. Like the better the game becomes, the higher the quality of matches, the more entertainment. Maybe you don't exactly feel it because you're new to the game, but like it's definitely there.
So
kind of
how would you? No. It definitely puts me. It leads into the next question very well. You know, would you agree that would you agree that we have an issue in the scene as a whole, whether you're casual, whether you're hardcore, you know, wherever you fall between that spectrum? Would you agree that there's an issue with understanding it, or is that a non-issue in the sense that it doesn't really matter as long as people are having fun watching?
Okay.
I know, it's a strange question.
It's a loaded question in the sense that like if people are having fun, good. But how do you measure how much fun they're having?
That's fair.
Like,
and I didn't mean it to come across as a loaded question.
No, I mean it's typically like individual viewer differences. Like I don't, you know, personally, I don't give a fuck if Uber is talking about, oh, this is go, I mean, this is 3-3, like this is tank. Like I know that. Like my little sister knows that at this point. Like I don't want that information. What I want to see is specifically how this one Lucio player consistently has like 20% extra damage, but he still has the same healing amount because he's mind-bogglingly phenomenal at that one hero. And the thing with Overwatch is there's so many variables. Like A, we can't see them. B, how do you parse which one is more important than others?
That's true.
It's like a really tough situation because in an idealistic world, the thing I was discussing that Riot Games did before, I don't even think they do that often because it costs so much money.
Right.
It splits the viewership. It doesn't cannibalize it necessarily. But yeah, you probably like use it in very certain scenarios because Dota 2, which I don't actually follow except for the international, so correct me if you know if I'm wrong, but if I'm not mistaken, not for any of their majors, but like for the international, they had the noob stream,
right,
and the beginning players stream, and the more experienced players. And Dota is a game that caters very much to the high level players, which I prefer, and I think you could absolutely, you know, trickle down metagame, but it does come at the cost of a huge amount of the general audience who are just completely alienated because they have no idea what the GOATS comp is, and I don't 3-3, and I don't blame them. Because I spend essentially all of my waking moments thinking about this game or learning about it. But it does come at a cost, and figuring out like how exactly you balance that, and is it worth it? And that's something that Blizzard, I'm sure, is thinking about. But I would definitely say that they're leaning more towards casual right now. If they don't start branching out opportunities for the competitive side, I mean, we're already like complaining about a shit ton of stuff, which is completely separate issue. But if over the next few years, the next seasons, whatever, they don't start branching out, then it's going to be pretty disappointing, and I do think their viewership is going to suffer.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. When, you know, because you're so experienced on the broadcasting side, you know, I try not to harp on this too much. I do want to get into some of your history, and you know, if we need to, we definitely do episode 2 because there's questions that I have, and stories that I'm sure you have to share. But one last thing with the broadcast, you mentioned the backroom team itself, and that's what they are. You know, if it's 2 people, if it's 4 people, you all kind of have to work in tandem, and maybe there's a leader. Do you think there's a space for former players back there to kind of help, or a liaison to help teach, or, you know,
the game?
Not maybe not teach the game itself, but maybe even to fill in, you know, if maybe if Super or Reinforce, you know, maybe want to move and they want to change the positions, and you know, is there a space in the back room for them? Would you maybe?
I would never leak that Volamel, but I absolutely think there's space for them. The question is, will they want to do that?
Sure, of course.
Because in my mind, in terms of what I would rather do full time, like
That's fair.
working in the game, I want to do regardless. But would I rather be working as a producer, like an observing lead, versus being a janitor at Blizzard? Well, I'd rather do this, and that's a bit of an extreme example, but yeah,
That's I understand.
But that's what I was saying before, like having a player be the absolute lead guy until their production stuff, and it's not that much information, but it's definitely a couple dozen hours of practice, is comparatively good enough to other guys. They probably shouldn't be like in the lead chair.
Sure, of course.
But yeah, the pro players know more about the game. Like it's absolutely. And if a pro player wanted to make that transition, that'd certainly be unique. And I absolutely think Blizzard would embrace them.
Interesting. Now, obviously, again, I iterated this at the beginning of the show. You are a man of many hats. You are, a former player, former coach for multiple teams, Method NRG. Now you're kind of pursuing the path to pro dream, as you could call it. But let's start back at Method.
Okay.
What was that like? What was Method like? I know Line Pro, I believe, was on that team. Some of the stories, some of the more interesting happenings in Method at the time.
The Method squad that I worked with we were originally, so this was beta, summer of 2016, I think. We were one shot initially, which was managed by Potent Beast. The team was main support, flex support, Psycho Waffle Rolf, DPS. We kind of we had a guy called DOT, but it was Ultima Web Snow is what the people who have been around for a long time will remember. And then tanks were Chronic, XE, main tank, flex tank. That group was cool as shit, man. That was because we were all just dudes who were all kind of idiots and also butted heads a couple of times. But even though it was a weird situation where everyone was open with each other about the things they didn't like about the other person, that it came together really, really well. Because our fairy tale run, which really wasn't a run, but we beat who did we beat? Cloud9, and we almost beat Fnatic, although they got to ban our Koth maps, which otherwise we could have won it and gone to the playoffs. But we went to E-League, obviously. We beat Cloud9 the first time. We took Fnatic to, if I'm not mistaken, the last map. And then we lost to Cloud9 again after, they banned all our Koth maps. Without going into too much detail about what exactly happened the week prior, we basically got absolutely crushed in nearly every scrim.
Wow.
Nearly every single one. We were right next to Misfits because we were boot camping in the same place, and we were boot camping in a bar, which, I mean, shout outs to Battle and Brew in Atlanta. They were pretty cool. But it was kind of I'm not gonna say tough. It was a tough place to boot camp in.
Fair enough.
But we learned a ton from Misfits, who eventually became the champions, and all the pressure, because we've been with each other for about 4 months. We've had some serious problems. We almost didn't qualify because one of our players, who was the captain, didn't actually sign us up for the third week of gameplay. The dude, it was the one shot / Method story deserves its own Netflix miniseries in terms of how stupid, but not in a bad way. I'm nostalgic about it because everything kind of worked out, and all of them are my homies. But it was just silly that it all came together because sort of the last few days going before the tournament, it's fuck it, let's just have a good time, no expectation. And that really worked out well because our players individually were pretty strong. We had 3 of the top 10 spots at the end of season 1. We had a really, really good idea of what meta we wanted to play then. One of our players was from Brazil. He was homesick at the time, but after a week of playing on good ping and everything, everything kind of clicked together. And basically after that, after the E-League showing, I was in late summer, was when I was getting contacted and hired for the Overwatch World Cup, for example. So that's when I departed from Method. But yeah, those 4 or 5 months, man, that was a cool time.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong. So you went from method to observing, doing some back end work, and then NRG, or was there something in between?
I was on Tempo Storm for a brief amount of time. The interesting lesson that I learned, which initially, like a lot of mistakes, I guess, for everyone are like pride based, but like, and it's something that I noticed between when I was working with Method, because I was essentially signed as a coach, but I was an analyst. I wasn't. Okay. If you think of the traditional like coach perspective that a Korean team has, that is not what I was for Method, and that would have been pretty bad. But for my personal history, I definitely have like a lot of like disciplinarian sort of focused,
authoritative,
like a really authoritative upbringing, which definitely has some benefits, but it also has negatives in the sense that a lot of I was with Tempo Storm for about 2 months. A lot of the things that I wanted to implement were, in hindsight and or sorry, during the time, were like good ideas. Like I was an absolute dick. Like I wasn't handling things well. And there are some pretty good players. I mean, overall, it was not as like I got out of Dodge for a couple of other reasons that I'd rather not discuss, because
that's perfectly fine.
10 years from now, if I ever like an autobiography or whatever, it'll come out. But basically, like there was some good talent. The Keller, who was recently playing for Optic Academy GGA, was really good. Hui, who's been around for a while, is a good player, and Minnie, who's now Boston's Uprising coach. Those were actually, Hui and Minnie were people I had worked with like in the beta phase when I was playing for like a month and then analyzing, because I went from analyzing their team to one shot, and then that's sort of how everything got picked up. I was with Tempo Storm for a little bit. We didn't have particularly good results, and I felt like there were definitely some issues there. So I left and was just kind of chilling, because I mean, I've been dreaming of working esports for a couple of years now. Especially as like my personal life and back at home and like in school, I was like really struggling. But that was like the first 6 to 9 month period where all of a sudden, like, I've like found success, and I actually like money at this point. Like, not a lot, but I can pay my own bills. And I'm doing well. And then from Tempo Storm, then I went to NRG for 4 or 5 months.
Kind of same question with Method, and correct me if I'm wrong. I want to say that you spent more time with NRG. A lot of the names that we still kind of hear and talk about, IDDQD, a lot of really talented players. I think I'd be remiss in not asking. Well, okay. Before I get into that, just highlights, general synopsis of the chapter that was NRG.
So NRG actually had, for entirely different reasons, but a similar problem to Tempo Storm, which was the team never finished. We never had a 6-man team. And especially at the time, that is, and even now, but like that is so important. Like Overwatch is such a, even at this point in 2018, and probably not for a very long time, people don't have like the perfect idea of how the game should be played. So actually having a team that develops over time is super important. One of the best North American teams was Immortals, and they were Sody Pop for a while. Immortals got crushed for months. Like they get bottomed out in E-League. They absolutely destroyed. And this is pre-Korean days too. They didn't pick up Fate or whoever. Like this was the Grim Reality squad. Yeah. Over time, they got really, really good. And then they came into contenders with a couple of huge upgrades, and then they became even better. Both of these teams I worked with never had the time to develop. And NRG, it was really unfortunate timing. Was initially like the moment I joined, Seagull left, which I don't blame him for. And he essentially left for like the same reasons like that he retired. And I kind of figured that it was coming. Like he definitely enjoys competition, but he also had a really, really good thing going because he was the initial streamer in terms of huge exposure. But he left nearly instantly. An underrated but actually super significant change that hurt one player specifically was the Lucio change. So the 30 to 10 meters. And that put Ajax in a really bad spot, because this is something that I will absolutely say he was a super good emotional leader, and he came up with strategies. He was, at the time, not a particularly strong player, and especially because the intensity and the difference in Lucio's style hurt him individually as a player. But after we lost Seagull, we had that one tournament with Mendo that we were playing for a little bit. He was really interesting prospect. He fizzled out for contract reasons, and then that's when people like I would say there's like 3 different phases in my mind of like how NRG exactly was, like just chronologically speaking. But that's when things started really being an issue because Ajax wasn't performing well. Everyone wanted to have a 6-man roster. You're about to see my cat, but oh, hello, cat.
That's okay.
Go away. And that's when things. There were definitely high moments afterwards, but it put us in a really bad position that Seagull, who was definitely the person that the team was built around, left, and then Ajax had a tougher time, and then then Dummy got Ajax and Dummy got a ton of shit, which criticism before every tournament match. We had, I think, 3, 4. Before every tournament match, I told the players not to read the criticism they're going to see because criticism, like Reddit, isn't real life. Neither is Twitter. Even if the people know what they're talking about, and even if you played like garbage, like who cares? Like your job is to be as good as possible. And I'm being a little bit hypocritical because I have my own anxiety issues, but like it's better to almost be a little bit delusional and always come in with confidence and being able to learn from mistakes as opposed to saying, holy shit, I lost this tournament or I had this terrible performance, my career is over. But Ajax and Dummy got so much shit, man, that their mentality dipped. Dummy's my roommate now. He's told me this isn't, I don't think he's ever like explicitly said this, so I don't know. I hope he doesn't like feel bad I'm saying this. He stopped playing the game. There was even a time when we told him, look, man, like you're on thin ice. We're really disappointed that you're not playing, and he didn't. He just kept not playing. So then, like 2 weeks later, he got cut, and all of a sudden, I came in a position where I was going to coach this team with 6 players, and like a month into it, a month and a half, we got down to 3. Things did not really pick up from there. So. If you want, I can keep going, or I don't know if you have specific questions about the situation.
Not necessarily. It was more just, taking a look at each of these chapters and just from delving a little, explaining and elaborating on that a little bit more. It definitely answers a lot more, or adds more context to the troubles that NRG had. It seemed like, from what you were explaining, an issue of just finding the right mix, and it just never really panned out. Would you kind of agree with that?
Yeah, and there was so much confusion at the time, in terms of like the players at this point are obviously pretty worried because initially they essentially banned it up and saying like we're not gonna like find us a 6th player, like give us the 6th player. The tournament we played with Mendo wasn't actually that bad, although we lost. Our scrims were actually going decently, but we weren't sort of expecting to be instantly super good. Sure. And it took at the time it took teams like a month or 2 to develop. I think the only like miracle team was like FNRGFE or something that met like in a week and was really good.
Yeah.
You could say that Shoes Money Crew is similar, but that's in terms of the level of competition that was so much higher at the time. Like the players overall were better, but like the competition was much fiercer because that was the premier tournament. And then it got into super weird territory where IDD, QD, Numlocked, and Hard Blue were uncertain about their status. We had a bunch of different things. We were saying like, okay, the Overwatch League is going to have subs. We don't even know if we're in the Overwatch League. Eventually, we knew we were in the Overwatch League for sure. And that's another thing that is a lot of organizations lied. And a lot of organizations actually lying to the Overwatch League or about the Overwatch League meant that players themselves were not willing to leave their organizations because they thought they
also
had a done
slots,
deal.
Right.
Contenders season 1, the qualifier, not season 1, it was like season 0. The 2 teams we lost to were FNRGFE, which ended up being like a top 8 contender, which we shouldn't have lost. Or like it was not good that we lost, but that was actually a good loss. Like it was a good team. And then Evil Geniuses, which was also a good team. Also, a fun fact about NRG, because that contender season 0 performance is really what, through all the like NRG deserves to go to Korea and all the other memes, like that was what cemented like the demise of that squad and eventually everyone's sort of status on that team. The day before so we told a player we didn't think he was a good fit.
Okay.
Because he wasn't. This was a main support. I think Dummy was still on the team. But anyway, We had an idea if we were going to play with a projectile player, not our first choice, but whatever. We told some main support players cut, and there's a main support player that we really, really liked in trials. We were doing pretty well in scrims. The day before the tournament, he was told by his organization he couldn't play. So we had to go back and tell one of the players that we cut, "Hey man, can you play for us?"
Right.
And I don't care, like, that was awful. Like that for every individual person involved, that is completely unfair. And that's something that I do regret. Is I think I would have stuck by the decisions I had made, a decent amount of them, through the mistakes I've made in my career. But like, if I were more savvy about how to, I don't want to say politically, but act as a business person, like a little bit better at like being objective but not as emotionally charged, I would have been better at making sure that the players weren't screwed over in the manner they were. Because there was definitely a lot of shit that I was dealing with that I absolutely shouldn't, like, it was unfair to me. But if I'd been better at my job, that unfairness to me, whether it was legitimate or whether my bias just completely towards myself, like not having made the mistake in that situation, I would have been able to take care of them better. But yeah, then that happens, and there's like a bunch of player names that I could tell you about. Like Retzi was a person that I was super interested in. Carpe was actually the general manager of the team at the time, and myself as the head coach both wanted Carpe. I had a different vision of how he interacts in the organization, though. Carpe recently played for Selfless and then went back to Korea. I was told that he's coming back to the USA soon. Our general manager wanted him to be on our team, but like we just had the failure to communicate a couple of times, and like that we didn't pick up Carpe, which is like, what? Dreamcasper, obviously the issues with Dreamcasper, like that's fucked up. That is entirely inappropriate. But like Dreamcasper was a really good player who was locked in a contract, so we couldn't even trial him. And as soon as I was fired, if I'm not mistaken, his trial was let go because I was the only person interested in him at the time. Eventually he got picked up by Boston, which is a really good pickup in terms of player skill. But a big issue was the sort of the different visions, and a really interesting in terms of the NRG situation example is, and I thought this was fascinating because I disagreed with everyone, and eventually that's one of the primary reasons I was fired, was that I think you do not need a team of 6 mechanical superstars to make a good team. Everyone in the NRG organization thought so. This was even like a big thing that Sefi was talking about, right? Sefi was the person to replace me as the head coach. Was that you bring, and I was told, like in sports, you bring the mechanical good players, and then the head coach coaches them into a smart team. So I was overstepping my bounds in a couple of ways because I was, before we had a general manager, I was trying to act as general manager, and even when we had a general manager, I definitely try to act like a general manager because I would disagree with them more.
Sure.
And again, I'm not really going to go into the other side of things. I'm just going to say my faults here because there's a lot of not good stuff. But I had such a strong disagreement in what was this very core thing. And I had a vision of like IDD, QD, and Hardblue are both great specific role players, or at least at the time they would have been.
Sure.
At this point, I'm such good friends with Numlock that my opinion is like completely unbiased, so don't really listen to me. But I thought Numlock would have been a good main tank to have, and then at the time I wanted to balance him with Remix because Remix is Numlock was a better aggressive player, better Winston. Remix was a better Reinhardt. And my opinion was that you don't need a fucking Lucio god who's mechanically amazing. If you're like, it's okay if your main support is not as mechanically strong if he has a good brain and if he works with the team. And that was something because A, we never got to build the 6, and B, because I had such strong disagreements with the general manager, with Brett and Andy, who are the owners, with Sefi. Like it just wasn't going to work. And there were things that could have gone better, but like even to this day, it's like such a strong disagreement, and I don't have any resentment towards them. Like, it was a pretty legitimate reason for me to be fired. And I still stand by a lot of the sentiments I had. But I like the experience I took, like, yeah, it like in a relationship in which you have such unamicable differences of opinion, it's just not sustainable. And there were a couple of things, like perhaps like I would keep working with the team, but like the general manager, wouldn't. But like that was not in the cards at all. So yeah. So then I got fired from NRG, which was 2 days after my birthday, which I definitely saw coming, which is kind of shitty. But I also I lashed out at XCC the week before, so like I was stressed. I kind of saw it coming. And obviously at the time it was like, holy shit, like my life is over. Like this is so sad. But now I'm like, oh well, all right. I got paid a decent amount of money and I learned a lot from it. Like whatever, dude.
It's a learning experience, it's life.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, would you ever pick up that hat again and get into coaching, or is the drive to really give it your all in being a player too strong?
So if I had a tier list of the things I liked out of like, let's say 4 jobs.
Sure.
Playing, casting, coaching, production. Production is a little all encompassing. That's not, was that the tier list? Like in order, it would be, initially I didn't think playing was good, or like I'd be good because I had, okay, this is a call out to a lot of coaches. Coaches are fucking cowards. Sorry, not every coach. A lot of coaches are cowards in the sense that they don't want to try to be players even though they're really good because they're worried that they will fail. This is something that I did, that I was in school struggling financially alone, and I didn't have the time to put into playing. So I just like was coaching because it was easy. Like it's much harder to tell if you're a good coach, and like I knew about the game. I think there are people who could actually be legitimately decent players or good players who are afraid to do that and go into coaching instead. Now, I also think there are people who obviously are very, very phenomenal teachers. They enjoy teaching. That's something that's a passion of theirs. But for me, I initially started coaching or production work because I just was trying to get any job I could,
right?
And was just trying to like fucking like be able to live, and live in the scene. But out of production and casting and coaching, maybe it's because I had some bad experiences too, but coaching was the thing I enjoyed the least. I still didn't dislike it. Like I actually liked it.
Right.
But I hadn't even been a coach for so long. I was trying to douse fires and get an actual coherent team of 6. And I would love to go back to coaching in a few years' time, but it is not a priority of mine. Okay. And I will only really look to do it when the circumstances are right, when I can prevent situations from developing like they did in NRG or Tempo, when it's like I'm much better at identifying early on in a relationship when things are like an issue.
Sure.
And if I ever were in a situation where I have a really aligned vision with like the owner of the organization, then yeah, like I totally wouldn't be against it. But right now, definitely not like thinking about coaching. Not really. Yeah.
Okay.
Don't really want to go back to it.
That's fair. Now, and this kind of ties into my, the final question, the future for you and the things that you're, potentially maybe getting into. Casting. That's not the thing, right? We'll get into that thing later. But when it comes to casting, where exactly would you say that kind of falls on that priority list? Is that,
casting before I played was absolutely the thing I enjoyed the most. Okay. I am, for people who are like my really good friends, like I enjoy being the center of attention and making like really like being a goofball.
Sure.
Like it's kind of like the Naruto complex.
Okay.
Where like Naruto was like a goofball because he wanted to be noticed. Now, when I was younger, it was for emotionally sadder reasons. Now it's just because I like being a troll and like I really love talking about games. Before, while I was still doing college for a little bit, before I worked in Overwatch really at all, I was pretty close competitive towards working with Riot Games as a caster potentially. I was in like a chat group with a couple of people who became casters, like Achilleos, Zubedius, and I was like never at their level, obviously. Like that was something that interested me. And I did that for Tespa for 2 seasons, and I love casting so much, man. Like I still love it. It just wasn't something that was sustainable for me because I knew that there were people that were above me in terms of like being hired for contenders or whatever. I was pretty open about some of my opinions in ways which were like different than like I didn't really fit in with the corporate culture, if that makes sense.
Mm.
Which probably closed some doors. I wouldn't say indefinitely, but also just made it harder for me to fit in certain situations where it's like, well, for casting, like I really enjoyed doing it, but I'm getting passed over. It's probably going to be a while. Like, and all of these things that I'm currently not focused on all actually get accented and improved by my playing. Like if tomorrow I decide, all right, fuck it, I'm not good enough to be a player, I don't want to be a player anymore. Every aspect of the other careers I've worked, or the other positions I've worked in, and what I would want to make a career are essentially improved by my experience. But it really, like 100% right now, is playing is the end all be all, like alpha and omega focus of mine at the moment.
Now, the future is a very kind of scary thing, and a little birdie told me that you have some interesting opportunities. Maybe South Korea is in there.
Yes.
You know,
so there is. I look at my career, wannabe career, as a player. I'm looking at it in the long term. I have accumulated a decent amount of debt at this point. not like a huge amount, but there's things I could handle in like my personal life better.
Sure.
But I'm not. Thankfully, so this isn't really worth talking about here. But I was kicked out of my parents' home multiple times, and I did not have a good relationship with them. I basically was adopted. I was an adult at the time, but I have like an uncle who is a professor at the university I went to. So he's making sure that I don't die or like don't starve.
Sure.
However, essentially like a parent, like he doesn't want me just to be playing fucking games 24/7, and he has no idea about this. So it's like, to him, it's like if I'm only playing, that is not okay with him.
Right.
And it's not really healthy too.
Yeah.
Like if you're getting paid full time, that's completely okay. But for me, I'm still thinking about playing long term, and like my development long term. Like I actually don't want to make the Overwatch League right now. If I could, if you gave me a contract to the Overwatch League tomorrow, I'd probably sign it. But like I don't want to play, like only as a sub, because in reality, maybe I don't suck. Maybe I'm not the worst at my position. Maybe I'm average. Maybe I'm middle tier. I know for a fact I'm not high tier. I know for a fact I'm not even close to the position and the skill and the experience that I want to be as a player. So anything right now that is, the name of the game for me is sustainable. Like if it takes me 2 years to get to the level of being like a pro player that I'm comfortable playing on a big stage, like that's fine with me. Like I think the game has some issues that make the game less enjoyable, but I'm not putting like a huge clock on myself. And yeah, I'm considering basically like a student internship, like a teaching position, teaching English as a foreign language in South Korea. I'll probably apply, although it's unlikely I make it this coming session, but it's like February, August. And if I got it, it's part-time paid position in Korea, teaching English. And I've taken a year of Korean so far in classes. I have been I'm finishing my AA, my associate's degree next semester in college to make sure I can actually apply to the program. And that also, obviously, all these things and the part-time jobs I'm working are all things that like placate my parents to like the guardian I have to make sure that I'm not sort of going nowhere. But yeah, like even if I don't make it to South Korea, there's so many opportunities and so many things to learn. Like I really enjoy, this is going to sound super cheesy, but the thing about being a player is ultimately all you need to do is improve yourself. And naturally improving yourself is fun. Like when you go to the gym, you get a new PR, or like when there's so many things when you're like bad at talking to the significant gender.
Sure.
But you get better after a while. Like you're gonna have a ton of rejection and you're gonna suck initially. Like it's a fun thing to get better. And I'm not like I obviously have a feel of failure, but not so that I'm like paralyzed and don't want to stop doing this. And like Korea itself, it'd be interesting because if I work part-time as a teacher and continue to play Overwatch and continue to develop, it'd be really interesting for me to actually get more involved in the competitive scene there. Because if you are able to make it in that setting, which is the most disciplined, the most, ironically, something I like a sort of authoritative, but also the most experienced, and it's really tough and it's monastic. and it's a little bit unhealthy in terms of work-life balance.
Mm.
But those are all sacrifices at this point that I want to take to be able to say, regardless of the outcome, I gave it literally everything I had.
Sure.
And if I make it there, if I make it there, that'd be fucking nuts. My career path anyway is like super, super weird. And then I'd be like a white guy working in the Korean Overwatch scene. But if I can say that. Yeah, like it's something that people, you see like really superstar players or like players that I look up to in other esports, like in StarCraft, obviously all the foreigners went there, or they had to play there. Like Golden Glue, like kind of a meme, but he became much better. Like you go to Korean boot camps. This would be like my own personal Korean boot camp. And all of this, as far as being a player is concerned, if I were garbage at the game or if I were not improving very quickly, like I'd stop. Like I'm not even close to where I want to be, but like I'm pretty high SR. I'm reasonably averaging 4,300. My peak is just shy of 4,400. I've been passed over for a couple of like contenders trials level teams. I've gotten pretty good feedback. Like I still have a lot of things to work on, but it's not like I said, all right, Seamus, you're gonna go into playing this, and I'm like stuck in diamond.
Right.
Like I didn't go into this, like I hit Grandmaster before and like reasonably high SR, so I was like, okay, like with more time, I can actually probably develop. And yeah, it's a fun thing to do as long as I'm not ruining my life over this. Like I have no major like relationships. I don't have like I have a lot of freedom to take stupid fucking risks as long as they're not too stupid.
Right.
And that's kind of what like enjoying life and being, again, cliches, like being youthful is about. Yeah. If I wanted to coach 15 years from now, I could. If I wanted to play 15 years from now, probably
maybe
could.
not. Yeah.
Probably could.
A little bit more difficult.
Yes. Just a tad.
I mean, that's super exciting. I think that's anybody who gets into esports within the last like 10 years, I think that's like the mecca, is the cliche term, but I love the analogy you give there to kind of New York, and it's like if you can make it in New York, you can make it anywhere. Yeah. It's the same thing with South Korea. If you can go there and you can at least give it your all, I think that says a lot more than most people sitting at home grinding ladder. So
yeah, and I have a bit of an issue where I like to make things hard for myself. I don't it's an issue because this is like my path, like this is my way. I want to do things my way, but it's an issue because I don't really do a lot of self-promotion. I don't try to ride other people's coattails and make things easier. Like I am so prideful, which again can be a good thing. In this case, I'm not really going to say why, but I'm a little unhealthy. Like I want to fucking own, and I don't want to get in off of other people not having a perspective that is correct. Like not off of nepotism. I want, like, South Korea in terms of development is leagues above the tier 2 scene in NA or EU, probably because of their own status. But it's also because of that, like, more of a meritocracy. Like, I'm sure there's nepotism and there's issues, and the fan base in Korea is crazy and stuff. But like you said, yeah, like if you can make it there, and the experience of that would be phenomenal. And like I'm trying to get as much experience as possible. I'm a German citizen, so like next year I want to apply try out for like the German World Cup team.
Interesting.
Yeah, and that we'll see if I even made that team, then they would be I would go into that wanting to perform very, very well and wanting my team to perform well. But like that, even if we do not meet our expectations, that's still a huge amount of experience. And the main focus is that I'm just trying to grind for experience right now. Yeah, so not sure if I'm actually going to Korea. If I don't go to Korea, hopefully I make a contenders team in the next season or two. Yeah, I'm not, the most important thing for me, because this is definitely something important for everyone, but for me, it's something I struggle with too, is not getting mad at like progression from on a day-to-day basis. Because if I look back specifically only as a player, but if I also look back just over my career in the past few years, like where I am now is super, super far away, pretty much every way from where I was a couple of years ago. And that's sick, but sometimes you can lose it for, when you have a really bad day in solo queue or your team gets absolutely dumped in scrims. Like it's hard to sort of rebound from that. But overall, I'm typically pretty good about that. So like, yeah, I don't need to become a pro in a year or a month or a day. I mean, it'd be cool if it's fast, or at the very least, like I'm in contenders level, so I'm not,
Sure.
just chilling in tier 3 like some people. But uh, I want to become as good as I possibly can, and there's really no other reason why I want to be a pro player other than like spreading the fucking like I enjoy these games. I like playing these games. I don't think I'm terrible at these games. So I have excuse me, I have a lot of purpose that's driving, as opposed to this being like a fleeting thing where
Sure.
every week I want to have a different career. Which is funny because you look at my path and it's super, super wild. And it's something I've been told before. People are saying like, what are you trying to do exactly? Like, just stay in your lane. Like, doesn't seem like you know what you're doing. And to an extent, I always knew what I wanted to do. I never was in a position to do it, but like I am very, very committed in terms of what I'm going to do. And I'll come down the road eventually if I don't make it a year from now and I'm still fucking just not on a team at all. And I'll probably be like, all right, well, it's time to reassess.
Right.
But right now I'm not putting only this. This is the most important thing, absolutely by far, and I will spend 99% of my life doing it. But like, I'm not neglecting other things as well. I'm not sacrificing, mental health or whatever the fuck other things. So
Right. Yeah.
I enjoy it. It's the path to pro itself can be improved, and Overwatch has a lot of issues. But I also want to be part of like being a pro player means you have such a higher podium to talk about things like these, and that's also a big issue for myself. Is I want to like if I were to make it, people couldn't say like people will disagree with me or dislike me. That's fine. Like
Sure.
Those people don't care about. But like I can say to myself, and I can say overall, like I'm a fucking hard grinder, and there's things I can give back to the game. So.
I mean that's one way to end an interview. I'll tell you that. I wish you the best of luck. Just kind of appreciating from afar, I'd say. As a young aspirant in the scene, just kind of rising up and seeing you and kind of watching your career take some turns, and where you're at now, it seems like you're in a good place. It seems like you find out.
You say young, but I'm 24, man. I'm
well
compared to the youngins I'm playing with. No, I'm showing you.
Like you've done a lot, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like, would you say this is like the happiest you've been in a long time, kind of figuring out what you want to do and really putting your nose to the grind?
I will absolutely say if I'm not in a good place, like if I feel bad or have a bad day, this is by far the best I've ever been able to recover from it.
Sure.
So yeah, I'd say am I happy in terms of the fact that I live in a fucking apartment making like a decent, like a low amount of money and then I'm just kind of like chilling? No, I'm not happy about that.
Sure.
But I know what to do to get to the places I want to go, and I'm not really rushing myself, and I'm definitely happier than I've ever been. And if I'm not happy in the moment, like I'm good about moving on and just keep grinding.
That's awesome. And again, I wish you the best of luck.
Thank you.
Final words are yours as I try to, at least give you the podium at the last bit. If there's anything you want to say, any shout outs, any people you want to, thank along the way.
I have one thing to say. Doomfist is a stupid hero.
Doomfist is a hero.
He's a hero in Overwatch.
He exists.
Which is a video game. Just like Brigitte, who's also a hero.
I think we're gonna have to probably do part 2 because that's like a whole nother holistic dive into.
We didn't really talk about like the game itself.
No.
But I mean like there's too many shout outs to give on like a serious note. Because again, anime cliches, like the amount of people I've encountered, even if I don't like them, are major disagreements with them. Like I try to learn from everyone. I mean, the big thing I'd probably just give a shout out to is specifically Frank, who's, like I said, my adopted uncle, and is making sure that I have power right now. But also I've had some really good friends that I've played with. There's a lot of players. Well, it was actually Keller and Huey who initially said, way back in the day, because I rang for a block, they suggested that I should try playing because I wasn't bad at calling. And yeah, for everyone who, even yourself, Volamel, like before we knew each other, like your articles were like fucking cool, and I loved reading them. Yeah, this is gonna be like the circle jerk, like everyone's I'm so happy. But seriously, there's a lot of really cool people in the scene. There's a lot of lame people in the scene too, but it's the game itself is really cool. Like imagine what's the fucking Winston, the Dr. Harold Winston quote? It's like, see the world for what it could be. Like, I appreciate the experiences and the things I've learned from pretty much everyone I've worked with. And I'm looking forward to seeing more people. So
yeah,
shout outs for keeping the scene interesting and my life interesting for sure.
That's one wholesome way to close out an interview. So we will, for myself and for Seamus, I will see you in the next episode, and we'll probably have you back on, to be fair. So, as for right now,
my pleasure.
Yes, thank you very much. I appreciate taking the time out and chewing the fat with me. But cool. Thanks again, and for all the people out in viewer land, exactly. See you next time. We'll catch you later.